This painting is a view of my brother and I's home for 3 days and 3 nights in Veracruz, Mexico, back in 1980. I had just gotten back from climbing Mount St. Helens just before it blew a month or so before. I wasn't supposed to be there. I had to sneak inside the red zone around the mountain to do it. I had never climbed a mountain before. I was fired up to climb another one. I also had some half-baked idea about trying to cross the Atlantic in a small sailboat. Let's just say I was different in those days. Glad I didn't get a real chance at that one. I even bought a sextant and tried to teach myself celestial navigation. And after this trip to Mexico, I was pretty well done with adventures for a while. My brother was originally going to go with me to Mount St. Helens, but had to wait 2 weeks for his vacation request to go through. I could not wait that long as the money for my trip was running out. It was a good thing I left for St. Helens when I did, or my brother and I would have been there about the time St. Helens blew up and killed some 50-plus people. I have a 1-hour illustrated video on here that tells that story, along with illustrations and photos of the crater, photos I took during my climb. I went through 4 or 5 earthquakes, one of which was a 4.9. Originally, my brother and I had decided to climb Mount Whitney in California, but I had the idea of taking a compass and putting the anchor point end on Kansas City and the pencil end of it on Mount Whitney and drawing a circle to see which mountains were inside the circle. Surprisingly, at least to me, I discovered that Mexico's highest mountain, Pico de Orizaba, was only 103 miles outside the circle. Mexico, now that would be a real adventure. Kind of like the old movie Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Little did we know our trip would mimic Treasure of the Sierra Madre in more ways than we could imagine. I began to cram on my Spanish, and we went to the Mexican consulate in downtown Kansas City to get visa papers. In those days, you did not need a passport or even a visa. The visa was kind of like insurance, just in case. The young lady who worked in the consulate was very nice and even typed us out a card we could show people if we needed to, what we were doing in Mexico and where we were going and why. It also asked the reader to help in any way they could and to help us get to our destination. Our flight to Veracruz via Mexico City with a changeover in Dallas was booked, and we were slated to leave in about a week and a half. We changed over in Dallas, Texas to Mexicana Airways. When we arrived in Mexico City, I was astounded at the size of Mexico City. It was at that time the largest city in the world, if not the smoggiest. We saw some pretty strange and funny sights on the flight line at the Mexico City airport while waiting to board our plane for Veracruz. A heavily loaded garbage truck was stalled on the flight line with starter trouble. A tow motor driver decided to try to help give it a push so the garbage truck driver could get it running again by popping the clutch. Every time the garbage truck driver would pop the clutch, the truck would lurch violently and a huge pile of garbage would be thrown out onto the hapless tow motor driver. There were 4 large piles of garbage on the flight line when the truck finally got started. We also saw a ground crew loading water onto an airliner's water tanks in the wing using 5-gallon glass water bottles. They were dumping them by hand into the tanks. We also struck up a conversation with a Cuban businessman dressed in a suit. He seemed like a very friendly guy. The flight to Veracruz was uneventful for the most part, with the exception of meeting a very nice guy on the flight who lived in Mexico City. He invited my brother and I to come and have dinner with he and his family in Mexico City on our way back home. Very nice folks. We arrived in Veracruz, Mexico on Mexico's Gulf Coast in late afternoon and took a taxi to the main bus station in Veracruz. There are many bus lines in Mexico, most of which are old school buses, painted in bright colors, and that haul both humans and small livestock, chicken, goats, etc. We are going to be riding the ADO, which is comparable to Greyhound or Continental Trailways in the United States. We could not find the baggage desk because there wasn't one. You just placed your baggage next to the bus's open cargo hold, and someone would load it on the bus for you, or so we thought. We placed our packs next to the open hold and got on the bus. The trip to Orizaba was beautiful, mountainous, with banana and coffee plantations everywhere. We passed some very large estates along the way. One of them stood out to me because it had a high wall surrounding it with barbed wire strung along its base. 2 enclosures made of sandbags on either side of the entrance contained machine gun nests manned by soldiers in khaki uniforms. I wondered at this, but soon saw the reason for this in the next village we passed through. It had hammers and sickles spray painted on the village walls nearly everywhere. Some of the mountainous terrain reminded me of parts of China. Pinnacles of rock with tropical trees, vines, and plants growing on and around them. It was like a dream come true for me. I remember watching episodes of Tarzan or movies set in the jungles of South America and wishing I could visit those places someday. When we got to the bus station in Orizaba, we discovered our packs or mochilas were not on the bus. We were concerned, but decided to book a room in a local hotel and check back the next day on our packs. The hotel was the historic Hotel de France. In those days, everything was old, but clean and neat. It was a favorite with climbers on the way to climb Pico de Orizaba. Here is an old photo of the hotel in its early days. Our room was the one on the right on the second floor in this photo. Orizaba has a rich history. The French Foreign Legion fought their very first battle there against the Mexican nationalist forces in the mid-1800s. The newly formed French Foreign Legion was mostly old men and boys in those days. Consequently, they were soundly defeated. In 1914, American Marines marched through Orizaba after landing at Veracruz on their way to Mexico City. I awoke just before dawn after a good night's sleep. I decided to slip out of our room and take a short walk. The streets were empty as I walked down the street. I remember looking above one of the buildings and seeing high clouds bathed in orange-pink light of sunrise. I stared at it, awestruck at its beauty. I was shocked at the realization that this was no cloud at all, but the mountain Pico de Orizaba. It was so high it was beyond belief. Pico de Orizaba rises to 18,491 feet, more than twice the height of Mount St. Helens. When I got back to our room, my brother was just beginning to awake. We got ready for the day and ate in a small restaurant just inside the front entrance of the hotel. It was enclosed in an original wood and glass when the hotel was built. The tables were set with white linen and silver. We were waited on by a man with longish, neatly trimmed white hair, a goatee and a mustache. He carried a white linen towel over one arm. He placed the plates, napkin, and silver on the table after we were seated. He unlocked the silver that was stored in the top drawer of an antique table with a drawer just below the top. Another waiter, a very young man who looked to be in his late teens, brought out our food, which consisted of colorful pastels and local coffee. I must say I've never had coffee as smooth and rich as that coffee. It seemed somewhat thick in that when you swished it against the side of the cup, it kind of hung there before sliding back down into the cup. In all the years since our trip, I have only tasted one coffee that barely came close to it. It's the flavor of an Arabica coffee. I suppose I should not marvel, as we were in the heart of coffee country. We went down to the bus station for another try at locating our packs, or mochilas. No luck. We exited the bus station and sat on the curb in front of the station. An old lady who was slightly hunched over stopped and asked if we were looking for a place to stay. I think she must have owned a hotel or boarding house. She waved some old-fashioned room keys she was holding as an enticement. My brother and I decided to take a stroll and explore Orizaba. I remember seeing an old man refinishing the high-arched wooden door on the front of a very old church. I told him he was doing a great job as best I could in my limited Spanish. He smiled a big smile and thanked me and corrected me on my pronunciation of the word trabajador. At about noon, we stopped in a small cafe and had another cup of coffee. A police officer who was standing in one corner at one point came over and placed his hand on my shoulder. I tensed up and turned my head to see who it was. I was afraid when I saw it was a police officer. I acted friendly and greeted him in my best Spanish. He smiled and returned the greeting and patted me on the shoulder. He seemed to be trying to encourage us, as I'm sure we looked very discouraged at this point. I initially was afraid he might be trying to put the touch on us. I'd heard so many stories about such things. This was not my first visit to Mexico. While stationed in San Diego in the Navy, I made a couple of trips to Tijuana with some of my Hispanic buddies. Tijuana is not the real Mexico, not even close. Mexico is very beautiful and the people are very nice, at least they were in those days. We spent another night at the Hotel de France and went to the bus station the very next morning. Same response, no mochilas. The manager of the bus station offered to give us a free ticket back to Veracruz. In retrospect, that was nice of him, but it might have been an effort to get us out of his hair, not sure. Our packs were an important part of our trip. We had 1 week's worth of food stowed in our packs for our climb. We only had 1 week's worth of money for a room and food. The loss of our packs meant we had to make that money last 2 weeks instead of 1. The bus ride to Veracruz was not as much fun as the drive to Orizaba. I noticed the highway seemed to be asphalt poured over whatever obstruction happened to be in front of the work crew. The driver was going really fast, making the bumps in the road even more obvious and pronounced. I noticed, too, this driver had a small statue of the Virgin Mary near the roof at the front of the bus with a small red light on it. I suppose it would be used by passengers praying about the condition of the highway and the drivers driving. We arrived in Veracruz just before dark. There was a hotel next to the bus station, the Hotel Central. It was affordable but full up as it was Friday. It seems that on weekends, from Friday night to Sunday night, the hotels are flooded by farmers and people from small towns surrounding the cities who come into town to party. Rooms are scarce. I've slept at a few airports in my time, so I suggested to my brother that we try sleeping in the airport. We hailed a cab driven by a friendly guy and went to the airport, but were disappointed to find the airport closed. Our driver, it seemed, had misunderstood what we were looking for and began driving us to every brothel in Veracruz. We would enter expecting a hotel and see the women lined up expecting to be chosen by the new customers. We ended up back at the hotel we started at. The park in my painting was full of vendors on Friday and Saturday nights. It was interesting, but we could not afford to buy anything on display. We went wandering the streets looking for a quieter place to sleep on the street. We ended up at the old fort on the waterfront in Veracruz. I remember walking around among the palm trees surrounding the fort. The area was popular with winos and street people. It was so popular the ground was littered with broken bottles and trash. A pungent smell of urine was everywhere. What I saw next I will never forget as long as I live. I saw a boy about age 5 or 6 passed out drunk and sleeping on the urine-soaked ground with a bottle laying next to his face. I often think of him and wonder what might have become of him. It's so easy to feel sorry for yourself, but there's always someone else who has it a lot tougher than you. We went back to the park in front of the Hotel Central, which was by this time kind of shut down. My brother and I found an empty round concrete bench and slept there. We took turns sleeping while one of us stayed on guard. The next morning we spent the day watching the passing crowd. We met a young boy about 14 years old who took us around and gave us advice. He thought we were Italians instead of Americans. We were living in an Italian neighborhood back in Kansas City. Perhaps that had rubbed off on us unawares. He was a good kid and seemed to enjoy showing us around. We would check into the bus station from time to time to see if our packs had been located. Once while checking on our packs, an argument broke out between 2 college-looking guys and some locals in the bus station. Soon a large crowd formed around the participants. A fist fight was looking imminent. I suggested to my brother that we leave as the police would soon show up, and all they knew is that some Americans were causing trouble down at the bus station. I was concerned we would be rounded up with them. We left the bus station and crossed the street to the corner across from the bus station. Soon a large army truck arrived and police officers wearing sky blue army helmets began pouring out of the truck. They were armed with shotguns and machine guns. So glad we left the bus station. Our young friend told us that if we were arrested, we'd be allowed to leave jail accompanied by a police officer to buy lunch. He also said our families would be allowed to send us money so we could buy food on these excursions. He added that sometimes the authorities would skim some of this money and use it as a kind of ransom. Nothing like having a tour guide, I always say. It's funny what you remember. I can still remember an advertising phrase from a sign on the side of a city bus. Mi banco es Bancomer. I also remember this woman walking her son in her pale orange dress. Today this park no longer looks like it did in this painting. All the palm trees are gone. Frankly, it looks awful. Monday morning finally came, and all of the farmers and out-of-towners left the hotel. My brother and I looked out and got a penthouse room, a small room on the roof. In Mexico, the cheapest rooms are near the top of the building. People do not want to have to use the stairs when the elevator quits working. We had some funny things happen while staying in the room. We once locked ourselves out of our room and tried scaling down the side of the building to our room's balcony. Our room did face the street in the front and did have a balcony, even though we had to walk across part of the roof to enter our room. And since we had to manage our limited money very tightly, our meals consisted of menudo. Menudo is a fancy word for tripe or cow gut soup. Cow guts have a very interesting texture, I must say. After a couple of days of eating menudo exclusively, my brother declared he didn't care what it cost. He was going to eat some steak. He was once in the bathroom taking a shower. The bathroom faced the back of the building and the alley. There was a balcony on the back of the building as well. I just happened to be on the back balcony when I saw a beat-up old pickup truck enter the alley. It was carrying a huge side of beef in its bed. The bed was black with old dried blood, and millions of flies were covering the beef and buzzing around the bed. I yelled to my brother to take a look out the window in the bathroom because his steak was coming down the alley. We finally gave up on ever seeing our packs again and spent our days waiting for our ordeal to end. Near the end of our wait, we began spending time in the bus station as the seats were softer than the concrete benches in the park. There was a stairwell rising to the third floor in the bus station, which had large landings. Most of the landings were covered with street people rolled up in large sheets of cardboard, sleeping. My brother soon found himself some unused cardboard and rolled up in it and went to sleep, while I sat up and nervously watched the bus station. We had to make a long-distance call to Mexico City. At that time, there were no cell phones, and even with landlines, the process was much different. If you wanted to make a long-distance call, you had to go to a larga distancia shop to make one. Inside the shop were long tables with enclosures for privacy. At the front of the shop was a desk with a clerk who would ring up the number for you. They would then point you to the phone you were supposed to use to talk to your party. The young lady who handled our call had a kind of sadistic sense of humor. She directed me to a phone booth at the rear of the shop that had a handpiece rigged to give a mild electric shock to anyone who used it. I finally spoke to Mexicana Airlines and confirmed our reservations. A day or two later, we arrived back at the Veracruz airport with no side trips to local brothels along the way. We had about $20 left between us. The lady at the check-in desk took our tickets and announced all was in order, except we had to pay an aeropuerto tax of $8.50 apiece. By the time we arrived in Dallas, I was ready to kiss the ground. We had about 50 cents left between us. What an adventure. Nothing like being a rich American.